The Little Mermaid. Far out at sea stood a magnificent palace deep in the water. The walls were built from coral reefs. The windows were mounted in amber. The roof was laden with seashells and pearls which shone brightly inside the palace. In the palace lived a king and his 6 daughters, as well as their grandmother, who took care of them. The 6 princesses were pretty, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. There was a garden outside the palace, with red and blue flowers, and some trees which glowed like the flames of a fire. Some even glowed a dark blue colour. In the garden, each princess had a little piece of garden of her own, to grow plants of their own choice. The youngest princess had a handsome white marble statue of a prince. Every day she would talk to the statue. The princess was in love with him. Their grandmother loved to tell them stories about people who lived on the land. The land of perfumed flowers and birds singing fascinated the Little Mermaid. But they would only be allowed to rise up out of the sea when they reached their 15th birthday. One by one, her sisters were allowed out of the sea once they reached 15, and the youngest princess was the only one who had not seen the outside world yet. Finally, when the Little Mermaid reached her 15th birthday, she was very excited about her first venture above the sea. The sunset shone with golden light, and it was so beautiful. In just a moment, the sky became dark. From afar, she could see a big ship. Suddenly, the wind blew forcefully, and the waves rose higher and higher. The ship rocked vigorously, and the next moment, it turned over. Everyone was thrown overboard. The Little Mermaid swam towards the ship. There she saw a young prince, who resembled the marble statue in her garden, but he was unconscious. Immediately, the Little Mermaid brought him ashore. The sun began to rise as she laid the prince on the sand, and then hid behind some rocks. Shortly, the prince regained his consciousness and smiled at another pretty lady on the shore, whom he thought had been the one who saved him. Downhearted, the Little Mermaid went back to the sea. She thought to herself,
"The prince doesn't even know that I am the one who saved him."
But the Little Mermaid couldn't forget the prince. Every day she would stare at the white marble statue, thinking about him. At last she remembered the evil witch.
She is powerful, I'm sure that she'll be able to fulfill my wishes,
said the little mermaid. So off she went to see the witch. The evil witch gave the little mermaid a potion and told her that after drinking the potion, her tail would become legs. But she would have to exchange her beautiful voice for the potion. The evil witch warned the little mermaid that if the prince did not love her and married someone else instead, the little mermaid would turn into foam on the water. The little mermaid agreed. She swam to the shore where the prince's palace was, drank the potion, and fainted. When the little mermaid woke up, her fishtail had been replaced with a pair of legs. The prince was standing beside her, but the little mermaid couldn't speak. She could only look at the prince. The prince took her back to the palace, but each step the little mermaid took was like treading on knives, and it hurt very much. Even though the little mermaid could not speak, she danced gracefully. The prince started to like her more each day. The prince started to tell the little mermaid about the pretty lady who saved him, but he didn't know who she was. It seemed that the prince was deeply in love with the lady that saved him.
It's me! I'm the lady who saved you.
The little mermaid tried to speak, but not a word came out. One day, the prince met a princess who resembled the little mermaid and mistook her for the one who saved him. The prince decided to marry the princess. The little mermaid was heartbroken, as the bride should have been her. She was the one who saved the prince, but the prince knew nothing. The grand wedding celebrations took place on the ship at night, and the little mermaid hid herself in a corner weeping and thought to herself,
"Tomorrow I will turn into foam."
The ship was crowded and noisy. The little mermaid leaned her arms on the rail and gazed at the sea longingly. Through her teary eyes, she thought she saw her 5 dear sisters waving to her. She was waiting for the sun to rise, and then she would turn into foam on the water and be gone forever. At that moment, she saw her sisters waving to her from the sea, but to her surprise, their hair had been cut short.
"My dear sister, we have given our hair to the witch in exchange for this knife. Take this knife and pierce it into the prince's heart, then you will not die. Quick, before the sun rises,"
said her sisters, before disappearing into the sea. The little mermaid took the knife and sighed. She thought of her grandmother, her father, and her 5 sisters who lost their hair for her, and she felt guilty. But when she thought of using the knife to kill the prince, she also felt uneasy. The little mermaid went into the room to look for the prince. The prince lay sleeping with his newly wed bride. The little mermaid kissed the prince on his forehead for the last time. As dawn broke, the little mermaid stared at the knife, then suddenly threw the knife into the sea, and the place where it landed turned the water to blood red.
Goodbye, my dear prince.
And she threw herself into the sea. The sun rose up, and the warm sunlight shone upon her. The little mermaid became lighter and lighter as she turned into foam and rose into the sky, floating towards the sun.